Welcome to Into the Truth, the podcast from the Catholic Truth Society, where we shine the light of Catholic truth on the issues of today. My guest today is Father Nicholas Crowe, Dominican and author of a CTS book that's about to be released on finding your vocation. Welcome, Father Nicholas.
Thank you very much.
So, Father Nicholas, you've recently written a book for CTS. With the rather interesting title, Living Your Vocation, even if you don't know what it is yet. So we're going to be speaking mainly about vocation today, about discernment. So really, I wonder whether you could introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your own journey to the priesthood and to the Dominican order.
Great. Yep, sure. So I'm one of those people that was brought up as a Catholic. So I grew up in the mighty Stevenage in Hertfordshire, God's own county. Yeah. And I had a very normal Catholic upbringing. And I would say that I just drifted away from the church as a teenager just through sheer laziness. Right. There was no real big issue for me, which sent me away. It's just the effort of getting up in the morning and going to church.
So this was in the sort of 90s? Or
this was so I was born in 84. So yeah, this would have been in the 90s. And for me, the reason I mention this is because for me, a call into religious life, really, I experienced it along with my call back into the church. So for me, the notion of God's speaking, how God speaks, how we respond to that call, it's got it's really deep for me, but because I think I began to experience this dialogue with Christ as being one that was both evangelizing and something that opened up a path in life that I never really expected. So it's always been a fascination for me, this idea of God's calling, what that means, and the different levels to a call, a divine call from God.
I mean, I'm interested in this idea of kind of falling away through kind of laziness. I mean, was it just because church wasn't kind of that interesting, or were there other things that were more interesting to you, or other things that you would wake up for on a Sunday morning?
Yeah, sure. So I mean, I was able to get up and play cricket.
Right.
Did a lot of that as a teenager and young person. When I got a job, I was able to get up and go to work, Tesco's. Right. Later, John Lewis.
So for bread and the circuses, yeah.
Yeah. So of course, I could do all that, and it's not that I had any difficulty functioning in life generally. I think it isn't. One of the things I often think about this is I think sometimes you can end up worshipping your parents' God. I always used to think of Jacob in the book of Genesis for this. That I think sometimes you go to church because your parents make you, and you're worshipping your parents' God. And I think sometimes there's a natural and healthy separation from your parents as you move into adolescence. And I think for me that just meant a separation from their God as well.
Yeah, you realise that God doesn't have any grandchildren.
Yeah, geez, that's the Sherry Woodell.
Yeah, that's a great line, though.
Yeah.
And that you have to discover him as your father at a certain point, otherwise it just kind of disappears. So was there like a particular moment or a particular, thing that you went to or something? In my life, the kind of World Youth Days were like a big testament and big moments of my kind of Catholic journey. What about for you?
So it's irredeemably geeky, I'm afraid.
Like a Dominican thing.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I wish I had a cooler testimony. But I went to university, and for me, university was a fantastic experience. And one of the reasons it was fantastic was that it awakened me to different ways of seeing the world and different ways of thinking. And basically, the short answer is that in my second year of university, I began to think quite hard about what is true. I think I'd picked up quite a lot of Catholic moral teaching and believed it. I've always been pro-life. So even when I was telling people I was an atheist, I was always pro-life, because there's certain aspects of Catholic moral teaching that just seem to me obviously true. But then, of course, you get to university and you start asking your questions like, well, why do I believe that? Why is it obviously true?
So what were you studying at university?
So I studied geography.
Right, okay.
There was a comment by someone in the crew here about geography earlier, which which amused me. I read geography, so there's a methodological problem in human geography. You're going to regret you asked this question. There's a methodological problem in geography, which is that if you're going to evaluate the practices of another culture, well, evaluate is just another word for judge. So how do I make a judgment about another culture? Right. So what right do I have to say that female circumcision in some parts of Africa is wrong? Right. What right do I have to say that ISIS think it's appropriate to throw homosexuals off the roofs of buildings? Well, what right do I have to say, as a white male Englishman in an elite British university, what right do I have to say that that is wrong? What's the foundation? And one of the things that began to increasingly frustrate me was that, on the one hand, everyone wanted to take a moral stance. Everyone did want to actually make very strong condemnations, and rightly, I would say, in most instances, that these things are immoral, these things are wrong. But at the same time, people were trying to say, "Oh, but there is no truth."
Yeah.
And
we're seeing that hugely at the moment in universities all over the world, where you're not allowed to make any kind of judgments between different cultures, and you just have to say that all of them are kind of equal.
And yet at the same time, we've become very judgmental.
Yeah.
And so there's that. I think that was already beginning. I was in university 2003 to 6, and that was already quite a strong world. And it was in really pushing at that question that ultimately it didn't happen quickly, but ultimately I would say I realised that I believed in God. I don't think I wouldn't be confident to say that I came up with a rational argument that proved the existence of God, but it was more that I realised in the process of this discussion that I believed in God. And then, which raised the question, well, do you go back to church? And somehow I had the instinct that if I went back to church, then that would have consequences.
Yeah, which in your case had kind of rather radical consequences. So
Exactly.
take me through that part of the story. So from kind of intellectually accepting that God exists and that essentially the kind of the moral teaching of the church has value and is true, how did that go from there to kind of really practicing to your own vocation in the Dominican?
So I went on a young adults retreat to Worth Abbey. And really I got there because I couldn't really stand the incoherence of my life anymore. That I believed in God, but it felt like I believed in God in the same way that I believe Jupiter is out there somewhere. I mean, the planet Jupiter rather than a god. The planet, right? I believe there's this planet out there now, but it doesn't actually affect my life in any way. Yeah. And I began to find that if I believe in God, this must affect my life. I began to find that just an unbearable contradiction. So eventually, I found online a young adults retreat at Worth Abbey, which I went to, and I went to confession, which I think is significant. And
was that something that you hadn't done for a long while?
Long time. Well, probably since my confirmation. Right. And just that by the end of that weekend, I just had a very strong instinct that, okay, now I was in, and that meant I was going to be a religious. I actually thought at that moment that I was going to be a monk of Worth Abbey. I remember looking at the monks and thinking, okay, I'm in.
And that escalated quite quickly then.
Yeah, that's for me. For me, so I say these things really, really came tightly together, and I think that actually, perhaps it's if you read the CTS booklet, I've tried to think theologically about that in the booklet, and whereas actually I think these things are related.
Okay, so let's come to that now. So, because I think your experience is one that many people have, that once you begin to take your faith seriously, the next question is, well, what does God want from me? And that experience can be quite difficult, kind of traumatic for some people. It can be one of those moments where you're just agonizing all the time. Yeah. So the question I suppose we need to, I'm here with the Dominican, so let's define some terms first. So what exactly do we mean by vocation? What is it that we're talking about because vocation, there's people talk about all kinds of vocations to your job or whatever it is, but I suppose in the church we're talking about vocation in quite a specific way. So could you give us a definition to work from?
Sure. So I should say that although when people in the church use the word vocation in a specific way, they also define it in different ways. So this is very much
to give us the correct one.
Well, this is this is a definition that really comes out of the Thomistic tradition, which means the theology of St. Thomas Aquinas, and even that. It's something that the commentators on St. Thomas's writings have kind of drawn from him. But I think the simplest way to think of a vocation is a summons from God to a definite goal. God wants you to go somewhere or do something or be someone. There's a definite end goal, objective, whatever word you want to use around that, that God is summoning us towards. And that actually means that we can have lots of different vocations going on simultaneously. Because on the one level, all of us have the same vocation, which all of us are called to enjoy perfect happiness with God in heaven. That's the definite goal that God called us to when he created us.
Yeah, so second question of the Penny Catechism.
Yeah, exactly.
Why did God make us?
Exactly. So, sometimes, I remember doing this in Youth 2000, where, and I like doing it because it makes people sit up and listen, but I say, I know the vocation of everyone in this room. And of course people
tell me, please.
They really want to know. But actually, at the most fundamental level, I do know the vocation of everyone in this room, because I know that our Lord is calling us to live in friendship with him now and enjoy perfect happiness with him in heaven. And that's the bottom line. And then within that, there are other ends, goals, objectives that he's calling us to as part of that journey. And some will last for the whole of our lives, some will last for a season, some are just for today. But they're all vocations, because it's God summoning us to do something, be someone, go somewhere.
Yeah. I remember going on a vocational pilgrimage to World Youth Day in Paris. So that was, what, I don't know, I think 96, if I'm not mistaken. I'm showing my age there. And I remember one of the talks that we had from a priest, he sort of said, like, there's only two vocations in Catholicism, and that's to marriage or virginity. Okay. So I don't know, I think that was like a sort of patristic, I think that was taken from the church fathers. But I suppose when we're talking about, you know, the specific vocations within Catholicism, so, you know, so that definition that you gave exists for every person in the world. Then obviously there's those who are baptized who have like another vocation, presumably. And then once you're baptized, there's the next level, which is, what do you do? You know, in what state do you live your life? So can you say something about that and what the real kind of options are within Catholicism? So
in my tradition, that the level that gentleman is priest, what was it? Yeah. He was speaking about is what we would call the secondary states. Right. Sometimes people call it secondary vocations, but it's so you have this fundamental vocation, those he predestined he also called, which is in Romans 8:30, I think. But then within that, there will be a call to a particular mode of following Christ, a way of making that journey. Right. So that's one way to cut it, is you're either called to marriage or virginity. That's one way to divide it. It's quite a nice way. Another way might be you're called. I mean, the more normal way to talk about it would be that there's the call to the lay state, the consecrated life, or the clerical state. Sometimes people want to subdivide it even further and say that within the lay state there's a call to marriage or there's a call to single life. Now, people argue about that. But the key point, I think, is that we have this journey to make to heaven. But that journey takes place in the context of real relationships and concrete circumstances, and in almost every instance, a commitment to love particular people in a particular way. So a commitment to love God and neighbour as a priest, or as a religious, or as a layperson, maybe with a family. Right. So that's how you are being asked to make this journey.
Okay, so having kind of laid out the options, should we say, one of the subtitle, which I love of your book, which is, you know, Living Your Vocation, even if you don't know what it is yet, that I think is a very interesting thing to speak about, because that period, which is a real, you know, can be quite long for some people, and can be quite kind of agonizing, you know, what to do, where to put my energies, how do I live even that moment in which I'm not actually sure which direction to go. What do you mean by that? How can we live out a vocation if we don't know what it is?
So again, I'm going to speak now from a very Thomistic tradition.
I would expect nothing less.
Yes. Absolutely. I'm glad. So, one thing to, I think, just first of all, remember that God is infinite and human beings are finite. That's the first thing. Second, God is simple. So, everything in God is God, which means God's will is infinite. And if God's will is infinite and a human being is finite, that means there will always be an element of mystery to God's will.
What, just because we can't kind of comprehend the whole plan or the whole of what he wants?
It means to say that I know God's will, in one sense is impossible, because to know God's will fully would be to know God fully. But I can't comprehend God with my thoughts, right? I think this is, I know this is sometimes comes across as kind of technical theology nitpicking, but I think it actually matters, because I think sometimes people expect a certainty when it comes to understanding God's will, that actually, if you think about it a little bit, is impossible. That there will always be an element of mystery when it comes to God's will for my life. So that's the first thing. Even if I don't know what it is yet, that I do want to kind of keep open the sense when we're talking about vocation that I have to be ready to learn more. That we have to be ready to be surprised by what God is asking of me. Now, I don't want to push that too far, because at the one hand, God has revealed his will in certain things, right? So I know that I'm not supposed to steal, and I'm not supposed to murder, and I'm not supposed to covet my neighbour's ox, and, all those things. So in some levels, God has been very clear what I shouldn't do. He's been very clear that I should love my neighbour as myself, all these things. So on one level, God has made very clear his will, but on another level, God's will is mysterious. The second thing I want to underline about that then is that because it's one of the things that God has revealed to us is that ultimately he wants us to live with him in heaven. And we do that by being disciples of Jesus. It means that we don't ever need to feel like somehow we are stuck or trapped when it comes to our relationship with God. That it's not that there's a puzzle to be solved, and until I solve this puzzle, I can't move forward. We can always move forward in our vocation, because we can always move forward in charity.
So let me see if I've understood that. In a sense, our vocation is always taking place within a will of God, which goes beyond what we can understand or do at any one particular moment. Is that right? So even when we might not know what our kind of life vocation is, even there, we're living in that state of going towards what God wants for us, which we don't fully understand at any one moment. Is that right?
Yeah, sure. Like, and there was a Benedictine nun called Maria Balding, who is a nun of Stanbrook Abbey, which is now moved to Yorkshire. I think she's died now. But Maria Balding used to talk about the reverse side of a tapestry. So that if you look at the back of a tapestry, it looks like a mess. And quite often our life looks like a mess. Like, we're not sure why on earth did that happen. I really wish maybe I'd responded to that differently. It looks like we've ruined it sometimes. Not clear why all this has happened. When we're in heaven, we're going to see the other side of the tapestry. We may well find that this season of our life that seemed meaningless and ridiculous, in fact, I was doing something really important.
I mean, this reminds me a bit of the famous quote from Newman that we'll have a particular task. We may not know what it is now, but we'll know that in heaven. But there have been moments in which that has been a bit of a kind of threat. It's felt like a bit of a kind of warning. It's like you can't see it at the moment, but then you'll know, and then you'll know whether you did it or not, and then you'll be in trouble if you didn't.
Yeah. So I think I understand what you mean. I think maybe a better image for the same thing is that I once was doing some work in a primary school, and there was the teacher had organised our class, so each one of them was doing a little picture, and they'd all been given various materials and resources through which to do their picture. And from the children's perspective, they were just playing with glitter and colour and glue and all these things. So each little picture was the child's free composition using the resources at their disposal. But when the teacher put them all together, it suddenly became clear that the teacher had a plan in mind. And when all these individual compositions were put together, it formed a really wonderful wall display, where each child's free composition had performed part of this bigger picture, right? So I think the Newman point, I think sometimes people do find it oppressive if they imagine, if the mental image they have in their mind is of life as like railway tracks, where you've got to get on the right track, and if you're not on the right track, then I've got it wrong.
Right.
And on Judgment Day, it's going to be revealed that it was all a terrible mistake. I think a better image to have in mind is actually God's power is so huge that it's more like the teacher taking the free composition to produce a whole. That, we have to remember that God transcends time. So at the moment he's creating the universe, he's seeing your life and mine. It's like we're never going to surprise God. So I think the work that Newman is talking about is simply the work of wanting to do the right thing, wanting to offer God a gift, trying to live the life of a disciple. And that actually, if we are trying to love God and neighbour, trying to make the best offering we can of our lives to God, then actually we are doing the work he expects of us, and in his providence, in his power, he can take what we use to work out his great work of art.
No, I think that's a really important point, and I think one of the things that becomes quite difficult, and I think people spend a lot of time worrying about in that moment in which you want to find out what your vocation is how to read the signs. What should I look out for? I remember in my sort of early teens, they'd be like, oh well, if the fourth car that comes along is red, then she's the girl for me. Kind of, do you know what I mean? You can end up almost falling into a kind of trying to read the tea leaves. How do we go about actually kind of reading what God has in mind for us?
Yeah. So, I mean, that's a very individual question, and obviously it's the one that everyone wants to know. So, but I want to say the beginning, I can only really sketch a broad outline to that, and people are always disappointed by the broad outline, because the broad outline is that I think that we nurture our sensitivity to God and his guidance by living a spiritual life. I mean, that's the bottom line. So I think that God speaks through most powerfully through what the best part of us loves. Okay. So one of the things that when I was Vocations director for my order in this country, well, one of the annoyingly simple questions I used to ask them is, well, what do you want? Right? And that's an annoying question, because I think most people, if they start to think about that question, what do I want, seriously, find that that's a layered answer, right? So if a man is called to a celibate state of life within the church, religious life, diocesan priest, he will nevertheless probably have a desire in his heart to be married and have children. And the reason is that it's natural and good to be married and have children. and therefore it is natural and good to desire to be married and to have children. So, in my experience, everyone I've worked with who has been called to the celibate life has nevertheless been able to identify in themselves a desire to get married and to have children. Because it's natural and good. And there are other natural and good desires that a human being will have because of what we are as human beings, our human nature. We'll also find that we have certain desires which have been nurtured in us by perhaps our culture, perhaps our upbringing, or have other desires which we have nurtured in ourselves through our previous choices. And not all of these inclinations and desires are healthy, right? So, to pick a safe example, I might really love red Ferraris. So, if an annoying Dominican Vocations director asked me the question, well, what do you want? I might realise that actually there's a part of me that really wants a red Ferrari. And actually that desire for a red Ferrari is making it really hard for me to actually think seriously about taking care of poverty. Right? Now, I would say that a disproportionate attachment to Ferraris, however wonderful the car may be, is the consequence of our past sin, or maybe the sin of the world acting on us. And so the legacy of our own sin and other people's can create a distorting impact on our desire. So we have to kind of begin to pause. Is this really a good desire?
Yeah, because I suppose one of the questions is there are desires, there are natural desires that we have that may be kind of fairly neutral, and then there are desires that we have that are the consequence of either some kind of imbalance in us or in society. And so I suppose one of the questions is, what do you do? Do you try and get rid of that or purify that in order to make a good decision? Or
yeah, so on the one hand, what you're trying to do is reorder would be the technical term, but learn virtue in order that our natural desires and these kind of acquired inclinations that we've got through our nurture and our previous decisions are become more aligned to truth. But fundamentally, when I joined the Dominicans, I always used to say this to the guys. When I joined the Dominicans, I wanted to get married, and I even had a pretty good idea of who I wanted to marry, right? The reason I became a Dominican is I wanted to be a Dominican more, right? And I think if you are called, then in addition to all this other stuff going on, and perhaps most fundamentally, there'll be a desire placed in your heart by God. And if you think about it again, I mean, people are often surprised by that, but, if you think about it, we'd all be horrified if people like me were dragging unwilling novices across the threshold and, forcing people to enter a religious house. Like, I used to say to the guys, if you're going to be a Dominican, I'm not interested in tricking you or forcing you in. If you want to do it, you want to do it. You walk in because this is the gift you want to offer God.
Is that because, I suppose, the desire, for example, to be a father is useful to you, or is in some way kind of analogous to what you'll be doing later as a Dominican? Is it that?
So I think there's I think human beings we're animals, but we're rational animals. We're animals made in the image and likeness of God. So qua our animal nature, we have all the we have the same kinds of desires as an animal would have. But qua image of God, those desires are elevated, right? So I don't just want to reproduce. I want to be married. Right? I want to nurture a child of God, not just spread my genes as much as I, do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
So the fact that we're made in the image and likeness of God elevates, if you like, already a natural instincts that we share with the rest of the animal kingdom. What happens when you're baptized is that there are certain gifts infused into your soul. Theological virtues, faith, hope and love. The gifts of the Holy Spirit. And for St. Thomas Aquinas, infused cardinal virtues. What the gifts of the Spirit do is sensitize you to the promptings of God. And the reason that God wants to move us in this way is that he genuinely wants us to make the choice, right? So he doesn't want to just move us like a puppet on a string. Like the Spirit doesn't. He doesn't want the Spirit just to push us around as just this inanimate object, right? He wants us to make the decision. So the Spirit prompts us through the gifts, sensitizes us through the gifts. And it's almost, I think it's almost to want what he wants, to maybe see as he sees, right? So I think that's the kind of experience that I'm talking about when it comes to God speaking through your desire. It's that he instigates in us a desire to offer him this gift, right? And that's what makes, I think, a vocation to marriage for a Christian different from anyone else choosing to get married. That if we're called to marry, then part of our motivation, and I would hope, in an ideal world, the most important motivation is I want to love, serve, and honour God through my marriage, right? And that's kind of a giving form to the intention in a way that's different from a natural marriage.
Yeah, with everything that comports, including children. All that. Because it's interesting, over the past few days on social media, there's been quite a lot of talk about the so-called dinks, the double income, no kids, who have end up kind of speaking about a relationship which is close to children. And so in that sense, you've got something kind of resembling marriage, we say, but which has one of the main kind of elements of it completely, has been rejected. And, it's easy to see then why vocation, marriage, vocation, all vocations are in a bit of a crisis at the moment, where we've used our intellect to actually kind of shut off things which we should feel naturally belong to the various states in life. I don't know if you've got...
Yeah, I think that's one of the unfortunately, it's that the consequences of nurture and our own bad decisions is that we can... Aristotle's got this really interesting line which St. Thomas Aquinas repeats a number of times in his famous Summa Theologiae. In some respects, I find it quite a scary line, which perhaps reflects badly on me. But Aristotle says, as a person is, so does the good appear to them. Right? As a person is, so does the good appear to them. Right? And what Aristotle is getting at is that you can train yourself to want the wrong things. Like through
what we'd call a cope today, just trying to argue that the thing that you're doing is actually the best thing. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, you can come to be a person who's more comfortable doing what's wrong than what's right. That would be the traditional definition of a vice. It's a person who has become skilled and gets, in a certain sense, a weird, distorted pleasure in doing what's wrong, and so we can make ourselves want the wrong things, and part of the danger is that we can kind of be guided into that by other people. We are social beings. In the end, and I think is
that the same as concupiscence, and the sort of inclination towards sin and stuff, or is that different?
Well, I mean, so concupiscence means desire.
Okay.
Now, St. Thomas would think that desire can be good or bad depending on the object, right? So you can have an appropriate desire for something that's good. So I think, I mean, I'm not really a theologian, but I think it's true that Augustine used the language in a more negative way to describe the kind of error that original sin introduced into the human heart, that made it harder for us to recognise what's truly good and what's truly important. And I do genuinely think that one of the things we've underestimated when it comes to promoting vocations is the importance of moral and spiritual formation. So one of the images I find myself coming back to again and again is the parable of the sower. If you think about, you can sow the seed, but if the seed finds rocky soil or soil full of thorns, it doesn't bear fruit. And I think, unfortunately, that we can receive a call, but it doesn't bear fruit in our lives sometimes because our hearts are full of rocks, or our soil isn't deep enough. And when that happens, I think the way to move forward is that daily effort to cooperate with God in order to create space for Him to work.
Yeah, so I'm getting a real sort of sense that in order to recognise what God is calling us to, there's preparatory work. You have to prepare the soil so that we can kind of recognise what our kind of natural desire is, and recognise what it is that God's trying to say to us. I mean, one of the things that you said just now was that one of the problems can be the people around us that can have an influence on what we do and what we want. I mean, they do. I mean, peer pressure is a real thing. But in terms of actually recognizing what God is calling us to, can other people help? Is it something that, if people kind of recognize, or for example, if you recognize some kind of quality in somebody, is it worth speaking to them about it? I've always found giving advice on that kind of thing a bit useless, to be honest with you. People kind of people want to find their own way, but maybe sometimes it's worth saying to somebody, have you thought about that? I mean, certainly that happens within a family with my kids. I'm always trying to place before them what God might want from them, but I think if I push too hard in one direction, I think probably they might go the opposite way.
Sure. I actually, it's funny you say this, because I think this is really important, and I think, again, if you look at what we already do, actually, other people are always involved, right? So, if I want to get married, at least one other person has to agree that this is a good idea, right? If I want to be ordained a priest, the bishop has to make a decision, right? If I want to join a religious order, the community has to vote for me, right? So, actually, we already know that a vocation isn't a private, introspective affair between me and God. The community are involved. There's always someone else who has to verify my sense of call, at the very least. And I think there's a really good reason for that I think that James says in his letter that I will show you my faith by my works. Right, that there's the sense that this interior aspect of his identity, his faith, is nevertheless made visible by how he lives, right? And I think it's a similar for a divine call. A divine call is this interior reality that's, I think, moving our desires, as I've said. But if it's real, it will be manifest in, or if it's
in a way that others can recognize.
Exactly, and they have to recognize in order for them to enable us to make this commitment, right?
Yeah.
So I think the one thing a community can absolutely do is, if we really are living together as disciples of Christ, then actually I think it would be really good if we could name one another's virtues. Actually say to people, actually, you're really good at that. Or I really see this positive.
I suppose naming other people's vices, which always seems much easier to do.
Yeah, exactly. I think actually naming where we see the grace of God moving in them, because quite often we don't see it in ourselves. I was really struck this. I was reading St. Thomas on the vocation to the priesthood, and he said a man should only be ordained priest if he's showing signs of holiness. It made me laugh, because if that's just obviously something that other people must judge. That if it was up to the individual themselves to decide, am I showing signs of holiness, then we'd only get sort of megalomaniacs and so forth as priests, right? Who sees signs of holiness in themselves? So I think there's something really...
I mean, in a sense, I suppose that's what the early church would thought about baptism. Is that, if you were living, if your life had changed and you were living a holy life, then you were able to be baptized. And then that was something that was recognised by the elders of the church. This person has actually changed their life. They're able to present themselves for baptism.
Uh-huh. That's it, yeah. And the other side of this, and I think this is something that I'd love us to think more about as a church, is the whole area of preparing the soil and indeed sowing the seed. And I think more and more, I think that we haven't really got a vocations crisis. We've got an evangelization crisis, and we have a formation crisis, and that begins with the family. That I think if the real challenge for us is to help our young people to maintain the freedom to hear God's word and receive it deeply. And I think that's definitely something we do together as a community.
Yeah, I think. I mean, the church has spoken. I mean, in some of the recent documents, especially on kind of preparation for marriage and things like that, it talks about remote preparation, essentially bringing up children in the faith. I mean, I recognise that I was father of 7, having with one, the eldest married, the fourth, the last in reception class. You realise that those things need to be prepared. Even preparation for marriage or possible religious life. If it hasn't kind of started from the very early life, you're going to be playing catch up, and might not actually be able to give them that free choice. Yeah. But on the other hand, it's also very beautiful as a parent to see how, if you have prepared the ground, then to leave them in that freedom. Let's see what they recognise God is calling them to, having given them hopefully some kind of idea of how to discern and to see what God wants from them, and not to be over prescriptive as well. God is quite is full of imagination, does lots of things that we wouldn't expect.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a lovely image, really. I mean, if we go back to Jesus' image of the sower, like you do your best to prepare the ground, you do your best to sow the seed, sow the word, but it's God that gives the growth.
Yeah.
And it can be wonderful to see what He does. I mean, that's part of the joy, I suppose, is seeing the wonderful and surprising things that God does in a human heart.
I mean, going back to, I think there's an important question just to look at, just as we kind of draw to a close. I think is a lot of people really feel like, what happens if you make the wrong decision, and that can really be quite kind of paralyzing. If I make the wrong decision, if I choose the wrong person, or is that it? Is my life? Will I never be happy? Will I never fulfill what God wants from me? I mean, you sort of touched on that with the analogy of the train track, but just if you can say something more about that, because I think it's something that people really struggle with.
Yeah. So again, it's I have to kind of be careful with it, because it all depends on the individual, their heart, their relationship with God. The other thing you have to be careful with is that God doesn't promise us an easy life.
Yeah.
And in fact, He promises us exactly the opposite. And so happiness is one of those words that I think God wants us to be happy. And I think there's a deep joy in the Christian life. But I think it's also manifest that doesn't necessarily mean easy. And sometimes it means deeply painful, and there's a lot of our brothers and sisters throughout the world who are persecuted, actively persecuted at the moment for their faith, and really do have to carry a cross. So on the one level, I think this is a difficult question because it's very particular, and also our Lord doesn't necessarily promise it's going to be easy. But having said all that, I would go back to that fundamental point. We know our vocation at the most fundamental level. To live in friendship with God in this life. To enjoy perfect happiness with Him in heaven. We also know what that journey looks like. It means growing in love of God and love of neighbour. So we may well have made wrong decisions. And I think what can sometimes be even harder is other people may have made bad decisions and we were innocent victims of those. I think that is actually a harder cross to bear in many instances where it wasn't our fault. And now we find ourselves in almost feeling thwarted. Like this hasn't turned out as I'd hoped or wanted. And it wasn't my fault. And I think it's really, really difficult. But I don't think it's hopeless. Because there's always an opportunity to love. There's always an opportunity to make a gift of ourselves to God and to others. And if we're doing that, then we are living our vocation. Because we're making this journey of love as a disciple of Christ to the kingdom of heaven.
Yeah. No, that's lovely. I think reminds me of something a bit that my mum used to say to me and my siblings as we were growing up, that God is a very good chess player. So you can throw in a weird move here or there, but he'll be able to kind of have his will done in the end, despite that, and sometimes because of it in a very imaginative and exciting way. Thanks for that. That was lovely to hear that. Thinking a bit about our vocation to sanctity, which I suppose it means a real friendship, a real shared life with God. Who would you say are the real kind of examples that you would put up as saints that can help us, that can shed some light on the vocational discernment, and who are the kind of best examples for those who are kind of struggling with their vocation?
Oh, that's an interesting question. So, when it comes to saints, I'm afraid I'm horribly unimaginative.
Right.
So, my great hero is St. Thomas Aquinas. I love St. Paul. Obviously, a son of St. Dominic. If you don't mind, if I might actually do something a little bit different, and I think if you've not read the book, Graham Greene's The Power and the Glory is a really interesting meditation on vocation. Because what we have, we were actually given that book to read as spiritual reading when we were novices. Yeah, it's a really interesting book. But I don't want to spoil the ending for people watching and listening. But a key figure in that book is a terrible priest, a whiskey priest, alcoholic, lazy, self-indulgent, and he has a child. So he's a bad priest. Because he's so lazy, he in fact finds himself as being the only priest left in his state in Mexico in the 1930s when persecution breaks out. And I think that's a wonderful meditation on how God can use us, even though actually we've made some terrible decisions which have really messed up our heart. That God can still use a person to as his instrument, as a means of grace. But I think you also see in the whiskey priest the fact that it would have been so much easier if he didn't have this disordered attachment to alcohol. It would be so much easier if he didn't have this disordered attachment to sex. Doing the right thing would have been a lot less painful to him if actually he'd made good decisions when he was a younger man and not bad ones, you see. So actually I think the whiskey priest of Graham Greene's novel is someone I think actually we can learn a lot from, in terms of giving us hope if we feel like we've messed it up, but also warning us of the dangers of neglecting the daily call from God to be faithful and faithful even in small things, as a way of making it easier for us to do the right thing when we're really tested.
Great. I think that's a wonderful place to end it, Father. Thanks so much for taking us through that. And if you're interested to know more about this, you can pick up a copy of Living Your Vocation by Father Nicholas Crowe over at the CTS website, www.ctsbooks.org. So from all of us at the Catholic Tree Society, thanks very much for listening. And thank you for joining us. And I hope you can join us again for some of our upcoming interesting and exciting conversations. So thank you. Thank you, Father.
Thank you.